the Reverend Joseph Howe. Mr. Howe was a peace-loving man and took note of the advice offered in the British Council of Churches pamphlet. At the best of times, the POW is in a difficult psychological situation. But a POW on the side which has lost a calamitous war is beset with special difficulties. A handshake in German is the same as in English. As soon as he could, Mr. Howe applied for a permit to visit Stanhill Camp, and by May he was holding services in a Nissen hut converted into a chapel for both Protestants and Catholics. He found a willing helper in Heinz Müller who could speak English, and before long they had 49 prisoners, carefully listed in the register of attendance. One of the most regular attenders was Heinz Hermann.
Mr. Howe war ein guter Mann. Er war zu uns wie ein Vater. Er besuchte uns immer im Camp. Und sonntags, nachmittags oder abends hat er Gottesdienst gehalten. Und später durften wir immer zu der Kirche Mount Pleasant gehen. Das war sonntags morgens um 10 Uhr. Und hatten dann dort im Gottesdienst.
Well, they would come into Mount Pleasant Church and walk to the front and sit on the left at the front. So we could all see them quite well because they were occupying the front pews and in a block and very obvious really to everyone in the church. They were in dark uniforms and my father chose hymns and tunes which were known to both the British and the German members of the congregation. Everything had to be done in 2 languages.
And everything had to be typed out and duplicated. Mr. Howe quickly enlisted the help of Miss Mary Clark of Clark's Typewriting and Duplicating Bureau.
Well, I like to help people, and Mr. Howe and the people at the church. I mean, I'd done things for them and did typewriting, and I'd always given them a special price. You know, I'd done things for them, and when he just mentioned it, I thought, well, I'd like to help them. That's all.
Mr. Howe's 2 daughters, Josephine and Pamela, were left with a deep impression of the German prisoners of war who came to their church every Sunday.
Do you remember that there was one hymn tune that we used to sing which turned out to be the German national anthem, Deutschland über alles. It's Glorious Things of Thee Are Spoken. We sang it too.
Da, da, da. Glorious things of Thee are spoken, Zion, city of our
That's
God.
right, yes.
And they were amazed.
Surprised that it was their national anthem and we were singing it to an ordinary hymn.
Yes.
Of course, they had very good voices, didn't they? All those men together.
We had an extra hymn right at the end, during which the Germans got up en masse and walked out of the church, because at that stage in 1946 fraternisation was not allowed, so the congregation were not allowed to speak to them. So they would go off down the road and back to the camp, and we would simply have been able to eye them and not actually talk to them.
When we arrived in Britain, we said, we are not prisoners of war because you didn't capture us. We are forced labor. And we are not here, we don't consider this camp a prisoner of war camp. I know you call it prisoner of war camp, but for us who came from America, it is a forced labor camp. And we said we acknowledge that Germans have many forced labor camps, and the Russians probably have forced labor camps, but don't you ever try to tell us that the British had not, because we were in many.
The Prime Minister, visiting his Limehouse constituency, undertook the pleasant task of opening...
Attlee, heading the new post-war Labour government, took the decision not to send the German POWs home. The Geneva Convention stated that POWs should be repatriated at the end of hostilities, but no formal peace treaty had yet been signed with Germany, and the Geneva Convention anyway didn't have the force of law behind it.
Attlee had to defend it in the House of Commons. He was attacked by the opposition for not sending the prisoners home. Send them home, it's inhuman. It was very brave of him. He got up in the House of Commons and said, I think it's justifiable that we ask for their work. They created this damage. Half of London was in ruins at the time. And I think it's only right that they should help in putting it straight again, which silenced the opposition. There wasn't much you could say to it.
We showed the world what we could do during the war. Let's show it again now. Let's pull together for prosperity.
They needed farm workers. I think that was the whole point. They needed farm workers because many of the British soldiers were still in uniform and no land workers. So we had to accept might is right.
German POWs were employed on roadworks and building sites as well as in agriculture. 4 million homes had been destroyed by German bombs, and massive manpower was needed to build the new housing estates. But most POWs worked on farms. During 1946, up to 1/5 of all farm work was done by these Germans.
We were taken out every day to work on farms. We didn't mind that because working, we felt, is good for you. And we met the farmers, we met the English people, and we liked them as human beings, and there were really friendly relationships very often. And we didn't want to let the farmers down, so we worked hard.
We did meet local people, drivers who were taking working units out onto the farms and so on. Very tolerant, very understanding. I suppose they knew the predicament we were in as POWs. They felt for us.
These are German prisoners of war. There are 385,000 of them in Britain today. Controversy ranges around them. Pathé News brings it to the screen. First, the churches. Speaking for them is the Vicar of St. James's, Norlands.
I want to know what the British people feel about the German prisoners in this country. What do you think, sir?
No one could have been more consistently or for so long opposed to fascist principles as myself. But this is a great human question. These men want to return to their homes.
That is a considered opinion. We know there are other opinions, no less honestly held. These Germans, now looking apathetic and harmless, were once confirmed Nazis. They carried German arms over Europe and Western Russia. They must take their share of responsibility for German crimes. You, the people of Britain, must decide these men's fate. From a poll of opinions, we bring you men and women in the street.
What do you think, Mrs. Tuffy?
What do I think about the Germans? Well, they're human beings the same as us. And they should be sent back to their country the same as our boys to be sent home here.
But Attlee did not want to send them home. By 1946, no more than 3,000 a month were being repatriated. The rest stayed and worked, moving from camp to camp as the Ministries of Works and Agriculture required.
It was a strange feeling when we marched into a camp again and went through the barbed wire gates, and there were emotions of anger, of disappointment. Why do they do this to us? The war is over now and we are still behind barbed wire. I have been in many camps, and basically they were all alike. I think this is a very